Adam, there we go. God, Adam still looks like he's in a congressional office.
You know, you try to hang on to any vestige of people care about you that you can when you get out of that
Oh, we
job.
have
So,
that. So I want to tell everybody that Adam Kinzinger was also a pilot in the Air National Guard, former congressman from Illinois, and he has been someone who, when it comes to these issues on defense preparedness, America's principled engagement in the world. I was with remarkable. It shows how things go in a circle. I was with John Bolton the other day, and John was, Ambassador John Bolton was not somebody I basically share a lot of worldview with, but we become kind of friends. And he's out there basically saying, I'm going senator to senator to provide to stop this slip in the GOP towards isolationism. And to hear and think about John Bolton saying and articulating those words that way and his concern is for many of us a real a change in mental map. But Adam, it's great to see you. Look, we have the NATO summit coming up. We have the National Defense Authorization Act coming up. You've been one of the most candid people about where you see blind spots. We have many friends from Europe right now online. We'll bring her in a moment, the EU ambassador to the Ukraine, who's in Kiev right now, Katerina Mafanova. And I'd love to get your take on not the rah-rah stuff, but what do we have to fix?
well, let me first off say too, when you talk about your friendship with John Bolton, and it's great to see everybody, by the way.
Semi-friendship.
Well, let's call it your semi-friendship.
Acquaintanceship.
Yeah, your acquaintanceship, your newfound, I guess, mutual respect, I guess.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on. I mean, look, some of my best friends now are Democrats, and I'm a former Republican because what you have and this is going into this question, you have this churn in the United States, this political realignment. And really what's happened is the Republican Party has become the isolation party, which the Democrats, quite honestly, used to be a little more isolationist. And the Democrats have, it's not like they've become hawks necessarily, but in contrast to Republicans, they've become the hawks. So it's been interesting. In terms of what do we need to do going forward, and whether it's NATO generally or Ukraine. And I'll talk about the GOP side because I think the Democrats are pretty trustworthy on the Ukraine issue, although it is time for the administration to unleash Ukraine to use American weapons on Russian equipment in Russia. I need to make that point now. But look, one of the things, so I have a political organization, and part of what we're doing right now is making sure that we're continuing to pressure Republicans for the next Ukraine vote. So I think
Adam,
what
tell people
happened,
the name of the organization.
yeah, it's Country First. It's country, the number
Right.
one st.com. And I don't say that to promote it, except to say my concern is that we're sitting here saying, good, we got the 60 billion passed, we're good. Well, we all know that we're going to have to go back to the well at some point again and get more money. And that's why it's important for us now. And I would say this to every one of you, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Europe, elsewhere, or you talk to American policymakers, never rest on making the case for Ukraine and Ukraine aid. So the thing I would say is we have to not wait until the very end to start bringing the pressure again. The pressure has to come now. So that's what I would say in the near term is our biggest challenge.
What do you think NATO as a transatlantic? Because I think there is a dimension. I mean, I'm going to just be candid. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think NATO had some wobbliness in it, and there was a little more discussion. We heard President Macron of France say that NATO was brain dead. Much more talk about strategic autonomy in Europe. You could feel palpably the tension. And then the invasion happened, and transatlantic NATO relations never been better, never been more vital. And my question inside is, if you needed an invasion of Ukraine to prove the value of the relationship, isn't that relationship in trouble? We have a NATO summit coming up in July. What do you think about how wobbly or not? I mean, how reactive that relationship is versus how proactive it needs to be?
Well, I think it's a very reactive relationship. I don't necessarily think that, it's a bad sign that it took the invasion of Ukraine for this kind of rejuvenation, this 21st century enlightened NATO thing, because look, I mean, the reality is humans get bored. We look for drama. If we don't have drama, we look to ourselves for drama, which is kind of what's happening in the United States. Our enemies become ourselves because we really don't see ourselves having an enemy. And so, with NATO, it was kind of like, well, what's the point? What are we doing here? We're all like, the Russians aren't really a big threat. And then they became a threat. And so I think that's normal. I think it's normal for kind of an atrophy of an organization and then to occasionally be reminded of its importance. But your second part of the question was what? Like what I forget what that was, your follow-up on that.
Well, I think the big thing is there a way that when the NATO summit is here, of being proactive rather than reactive
Yeah, I mean, look,
about
it's
needs?
there's a couple things. First off, there are a few members still wobbly in NATO. We need to be very vigilant about that. Hungary, we all know, right? We don't know
Mhm.
what's going to happen with Slovakia. Um, so there's that. The other thing is we need to continue to push our allies to provide as much weaponry as possible, as
Right.
much offensive weaponry as possible. And I'd say again, it's all about
So let me stop you there for a minute,
yeah.
because one of the big questions we have in today as we're talking, we were actually gonna do something kind of that would make most people's eyes glaze over and sort of talk about the bureaucracy of war, which among people in the defense industry is a really popular subject. You get out, it's not, so we didn't use that title. But the issue is when we talk about needing more offensive weapons production or more weapons production, I think, you get into questions like permits, permitting reform,
Yeah.
all these kinds of interesting things in capacity, which people don't want to hear about, but you don't have a magic wand. You actually have to go make and produce this stuff. And right now, the manufacturing capacity is at enormous highs, and I'm just interested, as we say that, I'm going to punctuate that in a moment. Do we need to kind of have a greater national discussion about
Yes.
what we need to do to bring on more capacity?
Yeah, so let's take it. It's similar in my mind to post-COVID. At COVID,
Hmm.
we realized that we had a very serious supply chain issue. We realized we had a manufacturing issue that, our medicinal supply was too reliant on China. And
Marty,
we started to
enjoy
think
your
in
walk.
terms of a national strategy. You guys might want to mute whoever just told somebody to
Yeah.
enjoy their walk. So,
Can I tell my
um,
team, please keep everyone muted who is not with me speaking?
um,
Thank you.
when we have and for Republicans, this is kind of anathema. We started to think, what is the government's role in ensuring that the right stuff is being produced, ensuring that the government can help
Yeah.
subsidize areas where it doesn't make sense? We have to do that on the defense sector. So right now, the capacity we have to manufacture is getting pretty close to maximized. The question is, are we
Right.
building new factories? Not really. We're not building new stuff to build 155. Are we creating contracts that are long enough to incentivize private sector investment in things like 155 shell production? Well, you actually make a lot less money on the production of weapons than you do on like
Right.
innovation and stuff like that. How does the government can step in and help that? And I think that's how we have to be thinking. It's, we have a Defense Production Act for a reason
Right.
because we understand the importance of the government making a decision on production. That's what we have to start thinking through, I think, because this industrial capacity is really going to be the defining thing of, does, Russia win against Ukraine, or frankly, what is our ability to stand up against China and Taiwan?
I'm just going to do something unusual here. Uli Finkenbush, unmute yourself if you're online, but do it fast.
I'm right
Are you
here.
there?
I'm
Hey,
here.
so you heard, guys, you're one of the people, frankly, I'm going to out you, who liked my concept of the bureaucracy of war. So just respond to Adam real quick, or if you have a question or comment. But basically, what do we need to do, in your view, to get to tighten up some of the wobbliness that I may have commented on, or that may be seeing?
So first off, thanks to GLOBSEC for this conversation. I think it's really great. Agree with many speakers that raised this issue before. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for transatlantic partnership. We got to meet the moment. It's pretty plain that both sides need the other very much, Europe and America. And I think we should be creative about what the kind of models are that we can
Right.
explore. I think if I look at, for example, AUKUS, that has brought to bear a few very interesting ways of collaborating on
Right.
technologies, but as well as capacity. And it's really built on trust, understanding that all players in AUKUS are in good times and bad times. And I think over to Europe, I think there's an
Right.
opportunity to think about similar approaches, much
Right.
deeper integration. Over.
Well, thank you. Adam, if you're cool with it, I'm going to bring on EU ambassador
Of
to
course.
Ukraine, who's in Ukraine now,
Yeah.
Katerina Mafanova, great friend, and love to have a conversation with her, with you.
Yeah.
And basically, Katerina, thank you. You've heard parts of the discussion, and I know your team has followed this, but again, I'm trying to get at our blind spots, weak spots, stumbling spots as you sort of look at the common agenda out there between NATO nations, the EU, and you don't represent NATO, but you do represent the EU, and would be interested in your take on this moment. You have a former congressman who's a very important national voice on security. From your perspective, where does the security relationship blind spots today?
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for inviting me. Great honor meeting you, Congressman, virtually. And I will answer with a direct response, and then we'll have a few reflections on the previous conversations as well. And especially because of the comment made by our friend from Lockheed Martin, I think that the biggest blind spot that we have right now is actually procuring in Ukraine. The level of innovation, the level of defense innovation, the level of ingenuity that the necessity forced Ukrainians into is remarkable. The level of development, for example, the naval drones that as of yesterday destroyed all missile carrying ships in the Black Sea. They have no longer any, thanks to their made drones by themselves. And it's actually quite surprising to me how little defense actors on both in Europe and the US use it, because how better to test your new kit than in wartime. So I think this is the biggest blind spot is this.
Okay, go ahead.
And the second one, I very much agree with the comments that both congressmen made. You know, now is the time to make case for Ukraine. I mean, they are essentially defending themselves with their hands tied. So first, they attempted an offensive without air cover, something no Western army even trains for. The Normandy landing had air cover 80 years ago. And now they have these restrictions put.
And the Air Force pilot is agreeing with you.
And it's really, as Congressman Himes mentioned, it's not about flying F-16s on Moscow. It's about destroying the kid that's right on the other side of the border, and we tied our hands. So I think that's the second blind spot. And the third one is the level of disinformation that the Russians are. You asked the previous speaker whether Russians or the US have better intelligence. I have absolutely no doubt it's the US and the West has better intelligence, but they are much better at disinformation, at corrupting elites and disinformation. And I think there is a lot of sort of mythology that we respond to still, or disinformation rather than the reality. So these are the three blind spots I see. And my last sentence is that, guys, we have agency. It's the West that has agency in this war. And it is a Suez moment, because we will determine whether they win or not.
Well, let me ask Adam to respond to any thoughts and bring on any other issues. We have Jake Auchincloss, a member of Congress who's been very active on the Select Committee on China, intelligence, and is kind of a broad swath of concerns. I'm going to get into something that I'm going to discuss with Jake in a moment with the ambassador. But Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's really basic, and I like what the ambassador said at the very end, which is we get to determine our future here. We've got to get, look, if you take the economy of Europe and the economy of the United States, generally Europe and the United States are roughly equal economies, right? Nothing against Italy. We love Italy. Russia's economy is the size of just one EU member, Italy. We get to determine the future of Ukraine, the future of Europe, and it's Russia that should fear escalation. I think that's the big thing. We used to, as Americans, call out Soviet nuclear bluffs and know they weren't using it and go about our days and do our foreign policy, and we crushed the Soviet Union. I think this is where it's important. We have atrophied those muscles of strength, and this is where it's important for us to remember that we get to determine what the future of Ukraine is. And by the way, it is international law, which is pretty conservative, that allows Ukraine to destroy Russian material in Russia. We know the Biden administration will get there eventually. Look, they've done an okay job in Ukraine, way better than the Trump administration would do. We know they're going to get there eventually. The earlier, the better. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Katharina, let me ask you a quick question before I bring on Representative Auchincloss. We have all watched Adam Kinzinger become a kind of conscience in the foreign policy area of views. And I know him, you kind of sort of see how both reacting to isolationism in the GOP, but kind of looking at, how do you make the proactive, positive case for American engagement in the world? I would say in Europe, you also have a kind of, I don't know what they called it, a deterioration, but a different focus. I interviewed at the conference I'm at now, the Global Security Forum, former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien today. And Robert O'Brien is very hawkish on Russia. And I said, wow, that doesn't sound like the Donald Trump I've heard. It doesn't sound like the Tucker Carlson dovish wing on Russia, much more hard line on Russia. And so it just made me think that there are these divides within different camps. And there are now divides in Europe. I won't say the H word, but you know which country I'm talking about. There may be others that begin. How hard is it for you to play a role synthesizing a consistent message on these European issues with Ukraine?
Well, I think that one thing I want to say, that the EU itself, the institutions in Brussels and member states have become security actors as a result of the full-scale invasion in quite unprecedented ways. And even EU budget instruments used for the purchase of weapons under a name of peace facility, a little bit Orwellian.
Right.
And it's true that the EU consensus is not as easy to come by, but has been consistent. We are now preparing 14th round of sanctions, and those are unanimous. I mean, this is the trick. You need unanimity for every step on foreign policy. So far, we've gotten it, whether we mention or not mention letters of alphabet. So I think that there is the peer pressure has been working, but it's not easy.
Well, look, I want to thank both of you. Adam Kinzinger has to run. He's got another TV hit. Katerina Martinova, I hope you'll stay with us a few minutes. We're going to bring on Representative Jake Auchincloss. I want to